It's been tweeted out on the MCN.
Display name, like, is unique. But display name, like, there can be Islamic Iranian, Islamic German, and whatever news record would override. So if it was Islamic Iranian, it would override.
Something different.
So nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah.
At least he's figured out what the issues are. Pretty good. Yeah. I did not go. So I told him, I was like, I'm gonna go, and I was like, nope. I can't leave the house after like I might home. I can't leave this upset, which is not maybe get dinner, but that's about it. What's happening on Tuesday? It was Twitch night.
Yeah, just started.
Oh, yes. Watching TV. Yeah, it's fun. I understand. I was like, I'm here for contracts. Like, I wouldn't be here right now. If I'd gone out there. I should chose.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay with this mic?
Yes.
I'm going to do one. It feels really natural after karaoke. So welcome to our panel on strategies for scale and sustainability. My name is Desi Gonzalez. I'm joined here with a lovely panel. Unfortunately, Loic, if you all know Loic from the Met, was not able to make MCN this year. He got really sick. But we will be talking about his area a little bit at the end. I feel like it's a really valuable thing to talk about. But our panel, we're kind of asking this question about, we all do these big digital projects that we put a lot of effort into, and then it goes out there into the world, but what does it mean for it to scale up or be sustainable over time? We're going to explore this topic through a number of case studies from each of our current or former institutions, so about 5 minutes per person. Before that, we'll sort of ask this question: what is scale and what is sustainability? And then afterwards, we'll open it up for questions. We're going to be using Slido. We've actually put some questions that we're interested in already onto Slido, and we want you to add your own and really use it as a tool to vote up and down kind of what are the most pressing issues for all of us that we see are the big questions when you're thinking about scale and sustainability. So I'm going to, and actually, should I give a brief overview of what each person? I'm going to do a little brief overview of what each person's focusing on today. Ariana's going to be talking about creating kind of systems, right, for scaling and how you scale it up and through kind of a content enterprise system. And I will then be talking about forming a partnership to think about ways to test out where your project might go in the future. I think after that is Beck, who will be talking about a 17-year-long digital project.
All right.
And what that means, right? And how it evolves over time. So I'm really excited about that one. And then Dana's going to bring it home and really, and not be talking about a specific project, but rather how do we think of organizing our own organizations, structuring our organizations to be able to deal with these questions of scale and sustainability. Great, thank you.
Yes, I was at karaoke. I was a very enthusiastic karaoke participant last night. So apologies. We thought when we were talking amongst ourselves that we should probably define scale and sustainability. What are we actually talking about? And sort of looking at textbook definitions, I guess. I think it's interesting that scale is both a noun and a verb, and we often use it. I found that we were often using it as a verb. So scale has to do with the size or extent of something, but we're often talking about how does it scale? You know, and so can it go up? And I think it's also worth thinking about can it shrink as well. And we'll talk a little bit about life cycle of projects. So some of the things I think about with scale are size. How big is it? How many people are using it? How many people does it take to operate it? But also breadth. Is it crossing lots of departments, lots of different kinds of staff? Is it crossing institutions, different audience types? That makes it more complex, the more breadth there is. And also socialization. So I've worked on a lot of projects within institutions that maybe my own staff didn't know about. And once a project, I think scale comes into it when you're trying to think about, does your staff need to know about it? Does everybody need to know about it? Do they need to be using it? Do they need to be evangelizing it to your audience? Are they adopting it? They fully embraced it, or they're like, oh, we have this thing. And has it, I think the ultimate is like, has it like fully infiltrated your organization's culture or somehow transformed it? So those are some of the things that I think about with scale.
And I'm going to talk about sustainability. So the definition that we're working from for sustainability is the ability to be maintained at a steady level without depleting resources or causing negative impacts. I really like that definition. And I really like this idea of is already bringing in resource and impact into the definition itself. So some of the questions about it are the resources that your institution or your department might commit to the project. Do you commit funds to it, right? Where are these funds coming from? Are they operating from the operating budget or from a project-based budget, right? Do you have staff resources, enough people to work on it? And do you also have buy-in from the staff that is asked to work on it? So some overlap with what we just saw with scale, right? In terms of the socialization part. And then, I wasn't sure if this was the right name for equality, but how do you evaluate? Are you evaluating, right? Are you evaluating the project? Have you set metrics for success? Not only are you evaluating, but then what does it mean to be successful, and how might you then improve it and iterate it to hit those success metrics? And then finally, life cycle. Is there a plan for the end of the life or for sunsetting a project? Is that something you've even thought about? Or does your institution just assume that digital things will live on forever? And so I will pass it on to Ariana.
All right, a little bit more about strategies for, strategies for scale with a particular focus on content at AMH. But first, a little bit about us and why this is a particularly sensitive topic for us, or important topic. We're a small team of 7 in the digital media department, and we work mainly with external partners to deliver most of our digital products and projects. The team oversees digital properties for most of our public-facing products, with the exception of in-hall, or most in-hall interactives. The museum welcomes around 5 million annual visitors, and on our website at amnh.org, we see about 9 million annual visitors. So because of that type of volume, both digitally and physically, we need to scale because of our scale. We spend so many internal resources in developing content, and as you know, that content development involves vetting and translations and approvals, and we try to syndicate this content across a few different digital channels. But there's always unrealized potential, and what I mean by that is there are always going to be digital products that kind of sprung out of a different department, and so they don't leverage our centralized content management system. So we're always seeking opportunities to help increase the distribution of our content without a correlated rise in cost. So the main CMS use case, and this is important, I think, with respect to the topic of scale, is managing our website content. That's first and foremost what it was born to do. It was the current CMS that we have, which is called Easy Publish, which nobody has probably ever heard of, but it's what we've been using since 2012. It has been largely untouched in respect to sort of its essential components for the last 6 years. But over the last 6 years, our workflows and our sort of internal publication model has become very democratized. In other words, we have people in just about every department of the museum updating and creating content on a daily basis, but without sort of a centralized gatekeeper for all of that content. So that comes at a cost, having no centralized oversight for all of this content production. So to give you a sense of the workflow, the happy faces are all of our content editors in the museum, updating and creating content every day, putting it into the CMS, and then the CMS supports content in a number of these channels. The main one obviously being amh.org, but it also feeds content in 3 different translations to our Explorer app and an in-hall kiosk. And we've also had a few other kiosks that have sort of come into the CMS and then for various reasons have sort of split off, come to their own. So a few lessons and aspirations with regard to scale and content. We've found over the last 6 years that true scalability is hard to achieve, and I can't overstate that in this sort of cloud age that we're in, we're now sort of in this era where we take for granted dynamic allocation of resources. Scale is increasingly more, at least in our organization, a problem of people and not of technology. Because every channel that people, staff decide that, hey, we want to use the CMS for this, we want to use the CMS for that, that ultimately invites a number of questions about how to customize the CMS for that delivery of new content. So this over time can lead to bespoke work, custom code, which can add overhead and ultimately decrease our ability to scale. So scalability is really a balancing act. For us, we have to balance three main areas: content production workflows, which, as I mentioned, are very democratized and decentralized; public consumption of that content, whether it's on our website or our apps or an in-hall kiosk; and then finally, how do we weigh all of that against requests to customize the platform? So we've gotten a little bit off balance with respect to preserving scale or the ability to scale in handling multilingual content for our Explorer app, because that meant bolting on a number of fields in our back-end CMS workflow and interface that created some confusion and overhead for editorial interface workflows, rather. So in other words, someone going in to edit a page about a hall in a museum might inadvertently uncheck a box and prevent that information from showing up in our Explorer app. And that was more of a question of introducing these changes into the editorial workflow that helped us ultimately deliver that content, but it came at the cost of some confusion and complexity with respect to the main use case of editorial workflows. And as I mentioned, this also increased the amount of custom code that we also had to add to the website, to the CMS code templates to deliver across all of these channels. So this is my main takeaway. It's impossible to scale. It's impossible to preserve your ability to scale without effective governance. This is definitely a learning lesson for us. I think this is true at the platform level, this is true at the integration level, this is true at the stack level, and it's so key to help your stakeholders understand, what is the primary use case for whatever platform that you are looking to scale over time. Because I think we kind of saw in hindsight that initially we didn't define that main use case very well. We kind of saw our CMS as kind of being this platform that did this content thing, and it did it well, so why not just use it for all these other things without giving much considered thought to sort of what that main use case was, and also what those derivative use cases were doing to sort of our overall ability to scale. So, and especially a tip I would suggest is just understanding who are the audiences for that use case. So once you have it defined, I think we take for granted that, of course, the CMS or any content delivery system is serving your public, but it's also serving your internal editors. And that's something that I think we just completely didn't appreciate until a few years had passed, but we now have to take that into consideration as we continue to scale the CMS to new digital channels. So looking ahead, we're thinking about what are those use cases that we can project, both near, mid, and long term, and are they legitimate derivatives of our main use case for our CMS to continue to deliver content to our site and our digital channels. And that's it from me. Thank you. I'll pass it on to
All right. So I am formerly of the Andy Warhol Museum, where I was in charge of all things digital there. I moved from Pittsburgh to Austin in August, but I'm going to be talking about a project from the Warhol that I have seen from birth through how it's moved on. It's called Out Loud, or Inclusive Audio Guide. But a little bit about our museum. We're based in Pittsburgh, which is Warhol's hometown. We do have a local audience that comes, but we have a lot of national and international visitors. I call this a medium-sized museum. We have an operating budget of about $6 million and a full-time staff of about 35. There's a caveat though, and a little asterisk. We're actually the smallest of 4 museums in a consortium called the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. So we share certain resources like HR and the central IT department. So maybe it's closer to like a staff of 50. However, the digital engagement or like the digital staff at all was one, me, right? And our initial budget for this project was $50K. And happy to talk more about, I'm really interested in kind of like how medium and smaller size museums can scale and be sustainable with these kind of resources, so happy to talk more to people about that later. The quickest overview about Out Loud, because this is more about how we've taken it on since its conceptualization, right? But Out Loud is our audio guide that's available for all visitors, but we design in conjunction with people who are blind and have low vision. So it's weaving together interpretive content with visual descriptions designed for accessibility. It integrates with tactile reproductions installed throughout the museum, like the Brillo box that you see right there. And it's using low energy Bluetooth beacons to push out content based on the user's location. And I include this timeline here just to show how I've kind of conceptualized the different years that we've worked on it. We designed, developed, and launched the app all in 2016, but really as a beta, primarily on one floor, with the plan of using that to think about how to improve and scale up from there. 2017 was kind of a growing pains year, working out a lot of kinks, workflows, such as how do we make sure we keep up with content production when there are rotations happening in the galleries, iterating on our location awareness system that wasn't quite working right. 2018 became, it was also when we were doing a lot of strategic planning, but it was a nice year to think about long-term strategy, prioritizing, and fundraising. Luckily, we raised some funds to build a content management system to underline the app in 2019 that will allow the app to expand to the full museum. I'm going to be focusing on one thing that we did in the strategy year of 2018, which was that we piloted a partnership with Carnegie Mellon University. And getting to that question of partnerships. Are they good for like, is it a good strategy for scaling and sustainability? So about a year ago, we were approached by the Cognitive Assistance Lab at Carnegie Mellon University, which is on the other side of town. The Cognitive Assistance Lab is run by Cheiko Asakawa, who you see featured here. She's using the system that her team developed. It's an indoor navigation system called NavCog that gives turn-by-turn directions that allows blind users to independently navigate a new space. And we immediately saw a lot of kind of synergy between not just, we're building something thinking with the same kind of ethos of inclusively, allowing opening up new spaces to blind users, but also same kind of open source ethos we came from and many other things like that. So we it went through kind of a big process with our senior staff to decide if this was something we were going to engage in, but ultimately we decided that we were interested in pursuing this partnership. For one thing, I mentioned that our location awareness system we've been iterating on and trying to improve, and we still hadn't really reached that level of precision that we wanted. We kept getting feedback to improve it. So we realized that there was a caliber of technology that Carnegie Mellon could bring to us that we didn't have a skill set and resources to do in-house. It was free of cost, although that's a big question mark, right? Because there's a lot of staff time that goes into partnerships, right? We decided we would do this pilot, kind of limit the scope of it. But then if it went positively and it was something we decided we wanted to move forward on, we could use those results to fundraise from there. And we also, our director really wanted to also make sure that we got something out of it. If we didn't go forward with this, we got something out of it. So we used the pilot to kind of as a communications opportunity to showcase how we're partnering with the community organization. For the NavCog team, this was an opportunity for them to test their technology in a new context. They've implemented it at the university, at the local airport, and a shopping mall in Japan, but they never used it in a space where it's not just about getting from point A to point B, so that was interesting for them. As well as they used it in a space where it's the first time they've ever included rich media within NAVCOG. And we conducted a study that they were able to submit those study results to academic journals and conferences. So that NAVCOG, we implemented it. I'm happy if you're interested in learning more about what the technology actually is. I'll talk to you about it later, but implemented it on one floor of our museum. We integrated not just the audio content from out loud, but also wall text interpretive content, so allowing us to test out kind of a new way of incorporating content onto a mobile device. And we conducted user studies with 10 participants. For me, it was an incredibly powerful experience to see people walking through our galleries, people who use a white cane or a seeing eye dog to get around spaces and often a companion, and to see them do it totally unassisted without the aid of a human, right? And one woman said, I don't usually go to museums because they aren't designed for me. If a tool like this was available, I would start going to museums by myself. Overall, I think staff felt really positive about NAVCOG, but we're still not sure if it's something that we want to implement. And really when I was leaving was when we were ready to start having conversations about, do we continue this partnership or trying to build on it? So a big consideration for us is with staff turnover. What happens when the staff member championing the project, me, right, leaves? Who can take that on, right? The idea of sustainability and growth, we're using someone else's technology, and if the cognitive assistance lab were to stop working on NAVCOG, even if it's an open source project, would we be able to still continue improving on it, right? We need to, Carnegie Mellon University is primarily a research university. They're not an agency, right? They're not going to be the ones maintaining our code. We need to get a software developer to customize it for our needs. And then finally, how would we, this tool that's like pretty new and very different from what we've been using, how would we train frontline staff? So those are some of the questions I'll leave you with, or and we'll later extrapolate into kind of bigger picture questions on how does a partnership become a real thing. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everyone. So I'm going to be sharing some lessons learned from sustaining a digital archive. And as Desi mentioned, the project that I work on, the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to use the acronym DAX, which is what we typically use to describe our project, was founded in 2000, so it's been around for 18 years, which is a long time for a digital project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how my boss and my boss's boss and our team have worked to sustain this archive over such a long period. First, I'll tell you a little bit about where we're based. We're based at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia. Our budget is sustained by an endowment that was seeded by an NEH Challenge grant back in the early 2000s and has been supplemented over the last 18 years with $3.8 million in funding, mostly from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And our project staff is 3 full-time members and 3 part-time members that are solely focused on the archive, which is really beneficial. Our audience and users are primarily researchers. They're historical archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, who are from over 30 institutions that we know of, spread throughout the United States, Caribbean, and the UK. And our website typically sees about 16,000 users on an annual basis. I want to take a minute to talk about our goals, because they've been really critical. Meeting those and keeping those as the primary focus has been really critical to sustaining this project. The first is to facilitate comparative archaeological analysis and research on slavery, on the social, economic, and cultural history of slavery. And we do that by providing standardized data from a variety of archaeological collections and sites. And currently in DAX, as of this year, we have over 3 million artifacts in our database that are collected from 83 sites all over, that are spread throughout the Southeast and the Caribbean, and this is a map of where all those are located. And we offer all of that data through our website, dax.org. We make it freely available to anybody who wants to use it. Our second goal is to provide standards and explicate standards for collections identification and analysis. And the way we do that is primarily through our manuals. So we define all the terminology that we use and how we identify artifacts. We try and do that as clearly as possible so that anyone using the data knows what we mean when we say a ceramic is creamware or whiteware or pearlware, and also how we identify something as that. So that's how we try and ensure that we're maintaining that consistency across all of these collections that are in our database. But one thing we faced over the last 18 years, and the database has gone through, and the project, many iterations, I'm happy to talk about more of those later, over its 18-year lifespan, is that in the last 6 years, we've really heard from our user base that they would like increasing flexibility in the system. And not just the data that we're offering them, but actually the data entry interface that we have and the database we have to store that data. And so for us, we wanted to meet the needs and the interest of our user base, but it's really critical to our project that we maintain the data standards that we have, because our goal is to make that data comparable over 80 sites. You should be able to analyze that data from any of those sites and make sure that you can do it on an easy level. And that really took a drastic rethinking of our workflow and how we manage and analyze our data and our collections. So from 2000 to 2013, the way that we kept that standardization is that all the collections came to Monticello, and they were cataloged and analyzed by our staff, by our members in-house who had all undergone the same training, knew what the standards were, and we could all talk to each other to make sure we were doing things the same way. But what we were hearing from the over 30 institutions that could be involved in the project was that they wanted to do their own data entry and use our system for their own data. So that led to my boss and my boss's boss and our team writing a grant to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in 2012 to fund a project that was called the DAX Research Consortium, which was an experiment that brought together 10 institutions, faculty members from museums, archaeological collections, to test a new iteration, a new phase of the database. And what that entailed was moving our relational database from a local server, Monticello, to the cloud. It's now a Postgres database, and creating a brand new data entry interface in Ruby on Rails that is browser-based, so that anyone with a login and a working website connection can now enter data directly into our database from anywhere in the world. But a critical part of that was not just making this database available and making it more accessible, but also ensuring that everybody who was using it was using the same standards that we were at Monticello to do our data entry. And that was really critical to our mission, as I've mentioned, is we had to make sure the data was comparable. So a large part of that grant and a large continuing part of our work has been training our collaborators to make sure, again, that we're using the same terminology, we're using the same standards when we're analyzing all of these collections, to ensure that our users, both the people entering data, but also those who are accessing it through our website, know that it's at the same comparative level. So the system launched successfully in 2014. Our partners added over 13 collections to the archive, which we deemed a success. And 4 years out, we still have 80% of them using the system. But of course, we think that we've entered a new phase of sustainability, but this has also created and identified other needs, which we're now working through with the second phase of the project that's being funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, called Expanding the DRC. So our users have been generally happy with the interface, but have asked for increasing flexibility in the amount of data they're recording and how to access it. So again, we are working through the project with them to increase the flexibility of the interface in a different way. And now we also have more staff time that is devoted to serving as support for our users, which is something we knew would happen, but we are negotiating, because that's becoming a larger part of our role, and we are a small staff, so we have to negotiate that too. So really the things we've learned, at least from this project that's kind of taken the database into a new phase over the last 6 years, is that we've had to drastically think about and change our infrastructure and workflow to ensure that the archive remains sustainable. And a critical part of that, though, is even though we've been willing to customize and scale to meet our user needs and our primary user case, keeping our mission central to that has been critical. At all points, we are primarily focused on, we need this data to be comparable for our researchers, for our users. So we want to make the system more flexible, but we have to keep that mission primary. And that means a lot of the decision making about the flexibility, we get feedback on it, but we are the primary decision makers in how the database gets changed. And we've also learned that sustaining this network really requires investments in community building. So we bring folks to Monticello on an annual basis to check in with them and see how they're using the system. We're training people on an annual basis, and we're constantly in contact with them through email and other means to make sure that the system is working for them, but also that they're understanding how their training is impacting their analysis and how they're looking at the collections. And then finally, this has been a long haul. It's been a long project over the last 6 years. It will likely take over $900,000 when it's all said and done. It's a lot of grant writing. but it has really enabled the project to evolve, and we think to enter a new phase where we think we are meeting the needs of our users, but keeping true to our mission, kind of lying at the intersection of these three things that's enabling the database to continue to move forward in a way that's really useful to our users. And I'm happy to take any questions during the discussion period. And just a reminder, we do have a Slido for this session. So there are a couple of questions populated in there, so feel free to vote them up and down, but also feel free to add your own. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm Dana Allen-Greil. I should have said this earlier, but I was at the National Archives, the U.S. National Archives. I am now at the Monterey Bay Aquarium as of 3 weeks ago. So I am talking about Informer Life, but I was there for about 3.5 years. And what I'm going to actually talk about is how do you scale and sustain the idea of innovation in an organization. So first, just a little bit about the archives. I think in terms of scale, it's probably one of the biggest organizations that attends this conference, about 3,000 employees. But in the scheme of the government, that's pretty small potatoes as an agency, so it's always fun, depending on your context, if you're like a big elephant in the room or not. So the National Archives is America's record keeper. They have lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff. Billions of letters, etc., and that's just the paper. So there's terabytes and terabytes of board electronic records. So scale is something that is it's just part of the organization, and it's a major, major challenge in the electronic age going forward. In terms of budget, $376 million a year, 3,000 staff. We have several museums across the country and presidential libraries, about 4 million visitors in person, a little under 100,000 researchers coming in person, and then 86 million online web visitors. So big, lots. I was within the Office of Innovation, so this is always fun. I've worked in education and IT. Where are the web people? There. In this case, we're in Office of Innovation, and that felt really exciting, but also a little strange. Like, what is web innovation? Is it innovation? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So that team is about 50 people, so bigger than some museums, I realize. The budget was about $1.6 million, and that covered digitization, web, social media, our catalog, which is essentially online collections, and project managers. And so I think the Office of Innovation is maybe less than 10 years old, and I arrived and I had all these questions like, well, what is an Office of Innovation? And I think also because just sort of the age of the group, people within the organization were starting to ask, like, well, what exactly fits under innovation? 10 years ago, it made sense for digitization to be the new innovative thing, but now it's just sort of how we do our business. So what happens when innovative projects become mature products, and are they still innovations, or should they be managed by an Office of Innovation? What's the best relationship between sort of research and development, so emerging tech, new ways of working, and the regular operations of the business? Should it be the same people overseeing that? Should it be the same budget? How does that kind of work if you want to scale up innovation and make it sustainable? And how should an organization staff and support the full life cycle of digital products? So I think many organizations, a digital product will be made out of a tech team or digital team. It'll stay there forever because it's digital, even though it might be the intranet. And it's really about employee communications, and maybe it belongs under employee communications. Okay, so this, in case you were wondering what is an Office of Innovation, this is what it is at the National Archives. It's different. Actually, I'm curious, do any of your organizations have an innovation officer or innovation office? One? Okay, two. Cool. I'd love to hear how yours were defined in our discussion period. So I personally oversaw web and social media and the intranet. We also had digitization, which is the biggest chunk of our staff, and that included both production, like doing digitization ourselves, as well as big partnerships, such as with Ancestry, et cetera, where they come in, digitize, and then give us the images. It also included things like open government. We knew it should include things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we also covered UX and crowdsourcing, and it's a lot of things. And a lot of kind of newer ways of working and traditional ways of working. And here's what the org chart looked like. Digital engagement was sort of anything that touched the public. And there were 2 branches under that, web and social media, and the digital public access, which is essentially online collections, and our crowdsourcing piece. Digitization, there's one person who did standards and architecture, but he gets the whole bubble. And then we had project managers, because we needed project managers to work with the IT project managers and to work with the budget project managers for us to do anything innovative. We needed people to just kind of work the internal processes. So that's the current org chart, and that's the way it still is today. But some of the issues with that org chart, it's a build and maintain model, right? So we would create new products, and then we would keep them alive, and then we would add more and more and more. The problem with that is that your responsibility and your scope just grows without necessarily increasing your staffing or budget. And who has dealt with this? Yeah, it's a problem. But we were also the Office of Innovation, so we're expected to come up with new projects and ideas and ways of working. And we didn't have the focused time to do that because the backlog always won. Something that's broken is in front of you shouting, more than like, AI is really gonna transform our entire business. We need to get to that. But right now this thing's broken. So that's an issue. Also, our staff are sort of organized by product line, so I'm web, I'm social, I'm catalog, instead of sort of skill sets. So what I mean by that is almost everything we did needed an outreach component. We needed people who knew how to let people know this thing existed and help engage with them, diversify our audiences, and maximize the number of people using it, no matter what the product is. Similarly, almost everything we did needed partnerships in some case, or in some way, shape, or form. And that's a skill set, how to establish and nurture partnerships, no matter what the product is. And how to implement emerging tech, new ways of working, so someone to come in and help us understand what Agile meant, or what Lean might mean to how we make decisions, would apply across product lines. And then we also have mature platforms, such as the intranet, that might be more successful elsewhere. So, for example, the intranet could move under employee communications. That means, though, that you have to be willing to let go of something successful and give it to someone else. And that was often hard, even though our scope was growing and growing, and so we don't have enough resources. We didn't want to hand it over to someone else because we were scared they were going to mess it up, right? So this is something we were discussing. I'm not saying this is happening. But what we were talking about was how would we organize ourselves to better meet the idea of scaling up innovation and making it sustainable. So we were thinking about having a research and development team who was really focused on the emerging tech, testing, iterating, building new things, and who was not the same team responsible for what we were calling product management or operations and maintenance. So the people who are uploading and fixing content on the website might be a different team, and they could focus on a different kind of iteration. A partnerships and outreach team that could serve across all product lines, and we still needed those project managers. So for that model to work, what we'd have to propose is essentially taking a lot of our mature products or processes and putting them somewhere else in the organization. Reshuffling of resources, right? That doesn't necessarily, the net sum is the same, but the discussion was to have digitization move to the same department that manages the records. For the intranet and the ICN, which is sort of like an internal Facebook, to move to the communications team responsible for communicating with employees, social media to go to communications. And I did not mean for web to be there, because that's still staying, because that's one of the examples of something that people didn't want to let go of yet. But I, as the head of web, argued that potentially it wasn't innovation anymore. Okay, put myself out of the job. So one of the things in thinking this through, again, how do you scale and sustain innovation, was around what is success? And we thought about these two different potential new teams. So operations and maintenance, keeping the things going, and research and development. And honestly, a lot of why we're talking about this is like who should staff these various areas and who's good at what, how do they think about their work. So for operations and maintenance, you're often thinking about who's using the product, are we increasing the use of it, the numbers of people, are people satisfied, are we doing things the most efficient way, is it cost effective, are there ways we could save money doing the same thing, is the technical performance good, living up to user expectations, are things not going to be supported anymore, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things you're thinking about, and there are sort of lots of opportunities there for improvement, but they're sort of more incremental. For a research and development team, you're thinking about velocity of experimentation, and are you learning? How quickly can you learn? How many assumptions are you testing for your organization? How many valuable insights are you generating? And are you making an impact on transforming the business for the better? And they're really different success metrics, I would argue. And I think it's really hard when we ask staff to do both of these things at the same time, which happens in both organizations, large and small, I would argue. So that's sort of it for me. I do just want to give a little nod that Loic was going to talk about sunsetting projects, which is not something I am highly skilled in. Having worked mostly for history and archival organizations who think that they should be saved forever. So I think we wanted to, I don't know if anybody on the panel had something they wanted to share, but we would also love during the discussion to hear from you. If you've been successful with sunsetting or planning for an end of life of a product, we would love to have that be part of this discussion about sustainability, because you can't just keep adding. At some point, something has to give, right? So that's it for me.
Great, thank you. All right. I actually put in a slide for sunsetting projects when to say goodbye. Do you want to start there, or should we go into Slido first? Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if people have sunset digital products or programs. When we were having this discussion just this week about, like, oh, we're so sad Loic's not here to talk about this, I then realized I kind of like had a little bit of PTSD with projects I'd forgotten about that we cut and that we did sunset, and we cut them, right, because something was broken and it was irreparable, right? And we, for years I've been saying, like, our online store isn't making us any revenue, and it's really broken, and it's not accessible, and so on. And it was until like it got like attacked that finally senior staff were like, okay, let's take it down, right? So I think that that's one way that products might sunset. Another way might be you start evaluating, right, and then you realize, hey, it's not doing well. And then I'd love to hear if anyone has had experience like thinking about it from the beginning. But go ahead, yeah.
It wasn't thinking about it from the beginning. It was.
I'm gonna give you a microphone. Is this on? Yes.
It certainly wasn't as planful as thinking about it from the beginning. But we had a period of time where we were renovating our buildings. We were closed for several years. And during that time, we built this cool new table that was all about interface and gesture control. But guess what came out while we were doing that? The iPhone. And then everybody went to touch the table, and it wasn't doing anything. And like, we had to spend so much more energy getting people to understand it was gesture-based. And the education department was in love with this tool because they had put so much of themselves into the content. But on the tech side and on the administrative side, we just knew it wasn't going to last. So we began planning for its retirement before programmatically it was going to be sunset. But you have to be responsive to what technology is doing, because oftentimes that'll be the cue of when something needs to go.
Maybe in one sentence, can you describe one metric or strategy you use to decide when to phase it up?
it took a lot of convincing because of the stakeholders who were pushing it in education, but ultimately what it was decided was that it was a black box because the vendor was the one who knew ultimately how to keep it alive, and that relationship was not sustainable. So even though from a user side, you could videotape people doing this, sorry, videotape, how old am I? And you could just tell that they wanted to swipe and touch and not deal with gestures. It was a fail on that standpoint, but it really took an economic model for them to realize we had to shut it down.
That's interesting. Erica.
Yeah, so I'm curious, did anybody ever work with Pachyderm, the consortial publishing tool developed with IMA Lab and a variety of other museums? So I'm at SF MoMA, and for many years, all of our digital publishing was done through Pachyderm, which was the authoring interface, back before things like WordPress or Tumblr really, or more consumer-facing authoring tools existed even. And of course, it was Flash-based. So at some point, when the mobile technology became pervasive and Flash was not compatible with the iPhone, and we were looking to relaunch our website in 2015, we made the difficult decision to sunset the old Pachyderm features. So they're still archived. If you go to archive.sfloma.org, you can find all of them and use them on any machine that is Flash compatible, but we're no longer authoring in Pachyderm, and they're not available through the current SFMOMA website. It's a, challenging decision, but I think an easy one, because we were making the decision to basically make our entire relaunched website mobile compatible, and having Flash-based storytelling within the website is not consistent with that goal.
Yeah, it can be really hard to let go. Does anyone have an example of thinking about sunsetting from the beginning or thinking about the life cycle? Go ahead. Maybe if you all could help pass the mics. And then I think we'll take one example and then move on to other questions just for the sake of time.
I was curious if anyone could speak to the role of documentation in either sustaining or kind of combating the black box problem, either kind of positive or negative examples, and whether that's, whether there was lessons learned and kind of, particularly on the development of internal tools. So internally, like creating your own software and, trying to put the documentation aspect in front of the tool in order to make these things more sustainable, not only from a technology perspective.
Do comments and code count? Because I think that's definitely saved our bacon a few times, especially with staff departures. So especially with front-end code and trying to extend front-end code to other uses, we found that this particular developer had a great habit of good comments and code. So that in and of itself was enough for the next person to pick it up and keep it going.
I'll just add, I think at the archives we were moving more and more towards open source software where there was a community that was contributing and documenting how they're evolving a product over time. So that was useful. And just as a manager, helpful to think about, like, if my developer leaves, I could replace him with another developer who could kind of pick up and understand what had happened up to that point.
Yeah, one of our big movements when we entered the new phase of the archive is to put all of our documentation, all of the code on GitHub for the database. So it is all up there. So now that we're revisiting it, we can go back and look at it. But the other documentation that's really critical are the manuals that I talked about. So pretty much everything in our database is documented on our website. So eventually, at some point, if it does go away, a lot of that work for defining those standards is well documented for others to use, that we hope they will use even if the archive's not around anymore.
That's a great question. I might turn us to Slido. Does that?
I have a comment about starting from the beginning of looking to sunset the project. We relaunched our website last October, and not a couple months ago, but like a year and a couple months ago, and we relaunched the entire thing in WordPress. And every plugin and tool we used was the most popular of that plugin or tool, with the understanding that if hundreds of thousands of people are using it, that we can always move to the next tool. And putting it in WordPress, because at that point 30% of the web was on it, so we knew there would be tools to transfer it out, because we're 100% sure that everything we're using will die. I think that's just how it works.
Yeah, so choosing the tools you're using and thinking about something, or what might happen in the future.
Can I jump up onto that real quick with a kind of similar comment? So the project I work on, we knew going in was a soft money project. We knew going in that there would be a phase of active development and then a maintenance phase. And so where I started with was not what is the best, what is the greatest tool to use to achieve this outcome, but ultimately what department within my institution will be responsible for maintenance. What tools are they already using, and can I latch onto one of those tools, which may not be the greatest thing for this particular project, but at least if I'm able to work within an existing system, I have a greater confidence that once the active phase of development is over, something will continue.
I really like that you're kind of weighing what will easily be adopted by your organization versus the needs of your particular whatever project or that objective. I'm going to turn us to this question here, if that's cool. So for the panelists, how can you decentralize the responsibility for defining new challenges and experiments beyond digital departments? Who decides what to fund and work on next?
I'll just speak to my experience a little bit with being in the Office of Innovation. I thought it was very interesting that it was everything we did was digital. And I thought there's a whole lot more to innovation than just digital, and that was part of why I really wanted to push to see some of these things like the internet move out of innovation so that we could focus on like the broader needs of the organization, that a solution may or may not be digital, or it may even just be how we work together or our work processes that need to be looked at that don't have to do with digital. And I think this might have actually been my question. Because I'm really interested in how do you empower the rest of the staff to think in an innovative way and to identify challenges that are in the organization outside just their silo that can then be worked on. And they don't have to be responsible for the solution, but they're responsible for helping identify what are those challenges or opportunities, and doing that in a way that is ongoing and equitable across an organization when you have limited resources to then solution, right? So for example, we had talked about having sort of open calls for ideas every quarter from our staff, and my concern about that was it sounds like we're then going to help solve all of those problems, and how would we be transparent about which problems we selected to work on, and where would the money come from? So I'd love to hear how others are dealing with that.
People in the audience as well. Yeah, you've experienced
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit, although it's kind of, it may be a niche experience, but hopefully it's more broadly applicable. I mean, for us, the goal of the archive really primarily was to make that data available through our website for many, many years. And it took kind of us, my boss and my boss's boss and our team kind of looking around our discipline of archaeology to see and talk with people who told us, yes, the data is really valuable, but what our discipline also needs are these data entry systems that are standardized for us to use, that we can use anywhere, even while we're in the field putting in and adding data. So even though the decision making in a lot of ways lies with us, the process of where the archive has gone has really lied with key members of our discipline and our steering committee, who have been the ones to tell us more broadly, we need this, and this is how you can help us in addition to making all of this data available. So that's kind of how we've gone about it, is just by listening and talking with folks.
So I have one example of a tool I've used to bring people around a common mission. So we just launched a Women's History Initiative at the Smithsonian, and we have a curatorial committee, a marketing committee, a education committee, and a digital committee. And what I did was invited all the all the people into one session around human-centered design to think about what we were actually trying to do and who we were serving. And as a group, we picked target audiences, and we're going to be bringing in actual end users to advise throughout the process. And actually, some of the curators have jumped on it and wanted to use human-centered design in some of their exhibits. So it also like selfishly injected the audience into the room of what we were doing, so it served both purposes.
That sounds really cool.
So I actually work in an academic library, which is very bureaucratic and siloed, and it overly prizes faculty librarians other than staff, even though staff are the front lines of what keeps us open. I don't know how to open the building at 2 a.m. when it opens. And the challenge for us, definitely with having that sort of creativity and innovation services department, which is mostly like VR, AR, GIS technologies, is that it really shuts down staff from contributing ideas that will really move the organization forward, because staff are the ones who deal with our patrons primarily. They know what they need. And having that input from frontline staff is critical, and as someone who works in the middle of all of it, I don't know how to put it forward, but I'm trying, because I moved from a staff position into a faculty position, and really trying to bring people into task forces and committees and stuff that's going on that may not be relevant directly to someone's job description if they work in interlibrary loan, but they still have ideas. So it's a small step.
I'd like to tackle a question from Slido. How can you best combat the sunk cost fallacy? And someone in the audience knew that one. The sunk cost fallacy, if you're not familiar with it, it's this idea that we put all this work and effort into it, so we need to keep going, right? We put so much time and money and whatever, but sometimes actually it's just better to nip it in the bud and not actually spend even more resources on it. So from both our panelists and audiences, have you had an experience with that?
Speaking from my experience at the Museum of Natural History, we found that for things like this, which is a very emotional situation, that sometimes, and actually I'll say more often than not, evidence, like actual quantitative evidence in the form of analytics or maybe A/B testing or whatever, or qualitative feedback as well, can go a long way in sort of bringing someone out of that emotional state of mind and more into a practical way to move forward.
I have worked on several products that were called pilots, and I understood that to mean it was a test, and if it did not prove successful, that it would go away or change. But I think the challenge, even with using data, is it's unclear what the cause is, right? So is it just we didn't market it well enough? Or is the idea actually not resonating with the audience? Is it not actually meeting a need? And in my experience, the hippo problem, the highest paid person in the room, if it's the highest paid person in the room's idea or like pet project, or they've told their colleagues about it, and have maybe already hinted that it's a success, it's really challenging. And then you're actually putting even more and more energy into trying to make it successful when potentially you have other things that are already more successful that could benefit from resources. So I don't have, I've tried with certain projects every which way, or even like, yeah, I'm still working on that, and some things just won't die.
That is so real. And Ariana, I'm really glad you brought up also the emotion that you attach to something. And one thing I have experience with, and now that I think back onto my time at the War, I remember all these things that I killed. Also, even if you choose to you're like a sunk cost fallacy isn't going to get me. I'm going to kill these things before it takes all the resources. People are still attached to things, and later might feel like they don't understand why we can't, or we put so much into it, and now I'm feeling demoralized. And in particular for us, when I got to the Warhol, they told me we've been working on this collection site for like 4 years. It was on museums, which is a TMS product, but it really wasn't like serving our needs. And so I launched it and then evaluated, and like 6 months later killed it. And then that was when I first started, and then just last year, like this year, I've been kind of working with the team to try to really build for long term for our collections website, and learned from people that they were really hurt by that, you know, and I didn't know that because I was brand new and I was looking at just the numbers. So then that is another barrier we have to cross, right? Like people are burned from this project. How do we get over that? Anyone from the audience? Yeah.
So this may be obvious or not terribly helpful. So I work at the University of Oxford. I'm quite new to the whole sector. We're an organisation of 20,000 employees, and we have no organisational development department. And what we're all talking about is organisational behaviour. So how do we reward good behaviour? How do we penalise bad behaviour? If we want to be more innovative, if we want to break down silos, if we want people to own digital and move it away from being, that's the digital team, that's their responsibility. And so I'm interested whether anyone's started to work with different types of organisations. So in my previous role, working with Corn Ferry or Hay Group or different types of organisations who work with other sort of corporates to sort of think about how is it that we want to behave as an organisation? What does an effective organisation look like? What is it we're trying to achieve? How do we make sure our organisational structure reflects what we're trying to achieve rather than reflects sort of historical oddities or pet projects? I don't have any answers, but that's where I want us to go, is more in that direction, because I think if we get that right, then it unlocks a large amount of everything else. Once everyone's heading in the right direction, the content, people will work that out because they will have the right relationships and skills and beliefs and mindset.
That's a really great point, and I think Susan, who's diagonal from you here, did a whole session on organizational design yesterday. So you two should talk.
Well, I'm not the expert on this, but Rob Weisberg, who's at the Met, he organized this session with me. Where are you, Rob? And he did an awesome reading list about work design. That's on. I also want to make a comment about the emotional aspect of sunsetting things, and I've sunsetted things like web pages, so I haven't sunsetted giant projects, but even a web page, or a microsite, that we did one of those last year, providing the staff a way to sort of package it up and say goodbye to it was really helpful. So and this was our director that I had to be able to do this with. And we're gonna take the meaningful part of it. We're gonna put it over on our website. It'll have a presence on our website as a thing that happened, even though we're getting rid of the website. And we've had people write blog posts about the projects to sort of like put it to bed and like here's what we did. So there's some record, and they feel like it's marked in history, even though the thing was there.
I'm just going to add on to that quickly and just say we had a social media account that was started to help. It was called This Is Archives, and it sort of passed from staff to staff each week. And the idea was to show people how to use Twitter, right? And it was super successful. We did a similar thing where we said, we're not, pretty much everyone who's going to do it has done it. We've run out. We were spending all this energy trying to get more people to tweet from this handle. And we said, you know what? Let's just showcase the best content from the past 5 years. They sent handwritten thank you notes to everyone who did it, and then said goodbye to it. So I think that's a really great point, that there are ways to acknowledge the effort, celebrate success, and say the time for this, that moment is now over. So thank you everyone for coming. I think we're here if you want to chat more. Thank you.
Is it nice outside? No, well, I need my clothes, or should I just
Well, that's what I said. Everyone has an opinion about it. Is it still? It was.
Yeah, sometimes it's, yeah.
Oh, how are you?
Good. I ended up going to karaoke for a little bit last night.
Oh, you did?
It was a huge mistake.
Oh, what?
It was a huge mistake.
Oh, no.
I'm just exhausted and it wasn't worth it.
Oh, man.
So,
yeah, I really, yeah.
the best part was like having a nice walk through Denver in the evening. It was actually quite lovely, but
Oh,
really
good. How far was it?
it's maybe a 25-30-minute walk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I also remember like, oh, do I want to go and also go to get the walk in? But...
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I ended up just feeling like I've been stuck in this hotel for so long. I just wanted to like get some fresh air.
Yeah.
So I just said, okay, we'll walk over there for a little bit. And definitely the most fun part was the
Oh, man.
Are you going to one of these big meetings?
No, I'm going to be heading out.
Oh, you're heading out to the airport?
Yep, yeah, I've got my flight's at 4:30, so they said I'm going to go in. I had a ginormous breakfast, so I had a ginormous breakfast, so I'm going to go to the Money Museum a couple blocks away. So
Do you know someone over there?
I don't. I randomly saw it the other day and then forgot about it. Like I was considering going to the Molly Brown house this afternoon.
You know, last time I was in Denver, I had to go to the Molly Brown house.
Oh, nice. Oh, right.
Unconference because it was mostly and then we did a museum.
Good.
Yeah.
It was really good that we were able to connect and hang out. I know. So
I'm one of the program. Yeah. So today I put on my speaker.
Are you guys birthday today?
Now we are sitting around. How about you?
Okay. No, it's my first time ever here, so it's been very thought-provoking. So,
I've been coming for 6 years, and I can talk to my and I've been surprised that even over the past few years, we still talk about forms, we still talk about technology, but we talk a lot about and we talk a lot about the mindset and not just the thing. And which I think is great. So there's so many things going on.
I'm not terribly technical. I don't think I've been to any sessions really where people have gone into a lot of tech. It's often been like here it is, and then we've moved on very quickly.
Yeah, even maybe a few years ago, there was dozen sessions where I didn't know what they were talking about, and now I sort of because the net is a huge place and it's pretty siloed, so you have to kind of force your way into, you have to push yourself to know about